What is poppin' YouTube? Back again with another video. Today we're talking about my 3 second-year wide receivers poised to break out in 2023 Dynasty Fantasy Football. Let's go. Now, my first wide receiver is not going to be Chris Olave or Garrett Wilson. Those guys already elite. We already know the type of target production that they have given. They're already going in the second, early third of startups. So we're not going to be talking about those two guys. But my first sophomore wide receiver ready to break out in 2023 Dynasty Fantasy Football is going to be Drake London. Drake London paired with Kyle Pitts. They just drafted Jahan Robinson. A lot of people are worried about the target competition that Drake London has. Even though he had great targets, he was earning targets at a very high rate his rookie year. Drake London played 17 games, had 117 targets for 72 total receptions with 10.5 fantasy points per game. The most impressive part about these stats is the fact that even though he had all of those targets, he had a 29% target share. Now, Kyle Pitts going down with the ACL injury does not help the case that people would say, oh, well, there was no one else to throw to. Desmond Ridder, Marcus Mariota had no one else to throw the ball to, so they were, of course, going to target the guy that was drafted in the top 10 of his rookie class. I hear all of that, but Drake London commanded those targets. He proved that he is an alpha. When a wide receiver like that proves that he is an alpha, that's enough for me to say that guy, as much as it didn't translate into actual fantasy football success, something that is super impressive with Drake London. If we look even more, if we're going to look a little bit more into those advanced metrics, he was 21st overall in air yards, 23rd overall in air yard share, and he was wide receiver 36 on deep targets, and he was wide receiver 18 on red zone targets. He is in the top 30 for a lot of these really high important categories that really translate to fantasy football points. Now, of course, the quarterback play wasn't great. If the quarterback play can improve just a little bit, if Desmond Ridder can take that next step, if Jahan Robinson can open up the holes just a little bit more so that Drake London isn't double covered, if Kyle Pitts can slide in, Drake London is a super exciting prospect to me, especially considering the fact that he is going as the wide receiver 13, wide receiver 14 in these dynasty startup mock drafts. He's going as the wide receiver 13, wide receiver 14, going in the mid 4th round of these dynasty startups, when I think that his ceiling, we could be talking about him in that same category, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson at the end of next season, where he's going in the back end of the 2nd round, which I think is very valuable to you. So if you do have Drake London, I'm holding, and if I don't have Drake London, I am trying to buy. What would I be trying to send out for Drake London? Now, I think a lot of people are going to debate this, but if you are a super big Drake London truther, I would be willing to send out the 106 for Drake London. Now, you're going to say, Caleb, but you're so high on JSN. Yes, but JSN hasn't commanded this high of a target share like Drake London has. As much as we want to say that JSN is great, if we're playing values at this point, if Drake London continues this success that he has had, then how are we going to say that JSN, if he comes in and doesn't get targets right away, all of a sudden his value is going to start to plummet? Where the same thing could be true for Drake London, but he has proven that he is an alpha dog with those targets, and those are the type of wide receivers that I want on my roster. So I'd be willing to trade the 106, the 107, the 108, any of those picks for Drake London, and or if you're trying to get younger, maybe you have to do like Michael Pittman in a second to get Drake London. I think the value that you get with this 2nd-year wide receiver and the upside that he has, Drake London is my number 1 2nd-year wide receiver poised to break out in 2023 Dynasty Fantasy Football. My second player that it's poised to break out from the sophomore wide receiver class is Jahan Dotson. Jahan Dotson kind of surprised a lot of people last draft, where he was drafted in the top 20 picks as this 1st round pedigree wide receiver. For those of you who did not watch Big Ten football, Jahan Dotson absolutely mossed my Ohio State Buckeyes. Jahan Dotson just kept mossing Shaun Wade play after play after play in the 2020 season, in his sophomore season against Ohio State. It was just embarrassing. It was just a whole embarrassing thing for Ohio State, but it showed of what Jahan Dotson was to become. And last year, even though he was playing for the Commanders, was playing second fiddle to Terry McLaurin, in 12 games, he still commanded 61 targets for 35 receptions. But the most impressive stat, to say the least, was the fact that he had 7 total touchdowns, which put him as the wide receiver 38 with 10.9 fantasy points per game. You might be saying, well, Caleb, if he didn't have those touchdowns, it kind of bailed him out. I definitely hear you with that, but I think the thing that we need to remember is we need to look. He had a 15.9% target share, which isn't great. We love to see our rookie wide receivers get in that 20% threshold. His target rate, though, was at 17.5, which means that his target rate to target share, relatively the same. The thing that really gets me excited is the fact that he had a 75% snap share. So he was competing with Curtis Samuel to be getting on the field, because for a lot of the season, Jahan Dotson was the wide receiver 3 before he really took over that wide receiver 2 role. So I think there's a lot of things that can be improved in Jahan Dotson's game. I do think with Eric Bieniemy coming over from the Kansas City Chiefs, having the ability for the offense to improve. Now, is Sam Howell going to be the answer at quarterback? I don't think so, but Sam Howell likes to chuck it deep. I think think one of the most impressive things about Jahan Dotson is if we look at his percentage of wins versus man. We love to say that a wide receiver can really find the soft spot in his zone, but necessarily can't beat a man one-on-one to get that separation. If we actually look at the fantasy points per target versus man, Jahan Dotson put up 2.6, which put him as the wide receiver 3 in this crazy metric stat. If we look at the percentage of route wins, he had a 35% route win rate, would put him at wide receiver 86, which is also not amazingly great. The man puts up fantasy points when he is against man. I would like to believe that if Jahan Dotson gets better quarterback play, gets a better offense, that all these stats combined are going to make Jahan Dotson a really great buy. And you're not having to spend something ridiculous. We're talking somewhere between the 111 to 201 is somewhere what you could be sending for Jahan Dotson. Now, someone might be super high like me in your dynasty league, and he's not going to give you that. Maybe you have to give the 110. But the thing is, you're not going to have to be giving up a Zay Flowers, a Quentin Johnston to be getting Jahan Dotson. And I think just Jahan Dotson has more than just touchdown upside to be a relevant fantasy football wide receiver, like a Deontay Johnson in his second year, or even a Brandon Ayuk on a points per game basis, which is super exciting for Jahan Dotson. Go see what it would take to go get Jahan Dotson in your league. I'm a big fan, and I think the metrics prove that Jahan Dotson has a ton of potential to skyrocket up 2023 Dynasty football rankings and put up a bunch of fantasy football points. My third second-year wide receiver that I think is poised to break out is Skyy Moore. Now, you might know, a ton of us were saying that Skyy Moore at the 108, 109 last Dynasty Fantasy Football Rookie Draft was not that crazy, and I was one of those people. Skyy Moore just laid a goose egg. Skyy Moore averaged 2.7 fantasy points per game, which put him as the wide receiver 122. Now, if we look at why we were so excited about Skyy Moore, comes out, of course, of Western Michigan, where he kind of transitioned into playing going from playing quarterback to then transitioning to playing wide receiver. He ran a 4.41 40-yard dash. He was in the 62 percentile for speed score, 49th percentile for burst score, and his biggest comparable on Player Profiler is actually to Golden Tate. Now, I'm going to be honest, the metrics on Skyy Moore do not look great. Like, they just don't. Like, if we start looking at his targets, like 108th, like we look at his slot snaps, we look at his fantasy points per game, all the stats point to the fact that he was the wide receiver 122 on a fantasy points per game basis. So you may be asking me in the comments, well, Caleb, why are you bringing him up as someone that you think is poised to have a really great 2023 fantasy football season, especially for Dynasty Fantasy Football? I think his price right now is just so absurd and cheap that you have to be taking the shots. Right now, his ADP is somewhere around the 125th mark, so he's going in the 10th, 11th, 12th round of startups. With those late shots, we're talking about a guy that on the Kansas City Chiefs offense, right now it's Kadarius Toney, it's Travis Kelce, they didn't re-sign Juju Smith-Schuster, they drafted Rashee Rice. But what is the difference? Like, even if Rashee Rice turns out to be a dog, like Skyy Moore, even if he slots in as the wide receiver 3 for the Kansas City Chiefs, a lot of exciting things can happen there for him. And I think especially knowing how long it takes sometimes for these Kansas City Chiefs wide receivers to get on the field, especially on the rookie season, like catching that touchdown in the Super Bowl, super impressive for Skyy Moore, and I think it got a lot of us truthers super excited for Skyy Moore. Will Andy Reid get him, use him how he should probably be used on the field? Still TBD, but I think taking that late round shot, I mean, you're trading a mid back end second for Skyy Moore. It's probably a back end second, honestly. You could probably be, if you're honestly on the clock and Rashee Rice is there, are you taking Rashee Rice or are you taking Skyy Moore? Now, granted, both of them were drafted in the second round, but Skyy Moore to me seems like the uber athlete. If we look, Tyreek Hill, he didn't really break out for the Kansas City Chiefs until his second year. I'm not saying Skyy Moore is Tyreek Hill. I think there's a lot of semblances and resemblances of Skyy Moore's game to Tyreek Hill's eventual breakout. If you agree with any of these wide receivers, let me know down below. I'll be answering all questions in the comments. We will be doing a live stream on Tuesday night, so hit me up about that. Hit that subscribe button to make sure that you get those notifications on so you can get in that draft with me, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.